Hi, my name is Jazper Lu, the local national news editor here at the Chronicle. I'm honored to be joined today by Valerie Foushee, the Democratic nominee for Congress in North Carolina's 4th District, seeking to replace Representative David Price, who is retiring. North Carolina's 4th District includes Durham, Orange County, Granville County, Person County, Alamance County, and one precinct in Caswell County. So, if she wins, she will be representing the Duke students, faculty, and staff that reside here in Durham. Foushee is currently a North Carolina State Senator for the 23rd District, a position she has held since 2013. She also has vast public service experience in the Chapel Hill Police Department, the Chapel Hill Carrboro School Board, and a commissioner for Orange County. Thank you, Senator Foushee, for joining us today.
Thank you, Josh, for having me.
So I guess we could start off, what motivated you to pursue a seat in Congress?
When Congressman Price announced that he was not going to seek re-election, I started receiving phone calls from supporters asking me if I would consider a run. I had not considered running. Actually, I had thought that I would end my tenure with elected service, but I did see an opportunity to advance some ideas that, of course, we've not been able to move in the General Assembly, having been in the minority the entire time that I've been a member of the legislature. So it's exciting. Again, it's an opportunity, and supporters have asked me.
Okay, cool. So if you were elected to Congress, what would be your top 3 legislative priorities that you would bring to the Hill?
Sure, thank you. I think that right now it's very important that we focus on protecting our democracy. So voting rights. I think that we have an obligation to preserve this planet. So our environmental situation. And then with the recent court decision as it relates to women's reproductive freedom, I think that it is past time that we codify Roe v. Wade so that we're not at this juncture ever again.
Okay, so touch about voting rights. What do you think should be done on that front in Congress?
So I think that we should first make sure that every eligible voter has the right to vote, that there is unfettered access to the ballot box. I do believe that we need to rid ourselves of gerrymandering so that we can protect the notion of one person, one vote. And I do think that any barriers that exist that keep us from having true representation that's of the people, for the people, and by the people, that we should eliminate all of that. So there are ways to do that. If we could get the Senate to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, that would be a great start.
Okay, and your second priority was about preserving the planet and fighting climate change, I assume.
Sure.
So what would you advance in Congress, and what would you support?
So I'm happy to see that Congress has passed in a bipartisan fashion the Inflation Reduction Act that does provide funding for environmental protection. But I think we can advance, the use of clean energy. We can advance wind energy. We can advance solar energy. And, we're at the point now where we should incentivize environmentalism such that it's a natural, everyday thing for Americans to do. And I think that there are opportunities there. I'm happy to see that we're moving in that direction, and I would certainly advance any of those notions. I think that we've seen how we can move with what was presented with the Green New Deal. And certainly if that type of legislation were to come before Congress as a member, I would vote to pass it.
Okay. So what do you think are the biggest issues that are impacting North Carolina specifically, and how would you work to address that in Congress?
As it relates to?
Just anything. What do you think are the biggest issues hitting North Carolina?
I think the biggest issue in North Carolina relates to health care and the fact that the General Assembly has yet to pass Medicaid expansion, which we know could provide access to health care for upwards 600,000 North Carolinians who fall in the insurance gap. That is a huge issue, and it has been exacerbated by COVID-19, but what it did also was to lay bare, what we are experiencing in this state. The number of rural hospitals that have closed because they could not afford to stay in business, which means that we're denying access to a number of North Carolinians who don't have the opportunity to get to a medical facility within 30 minutes or so, don't have ambulance service. When you think of people from the westernmost parts of our state or the easternmost parts of our states, having to come to this area for health care. I believe that health care is also a human right. Access to health care.
So what do you think should be done on the federal level, given that you're trying to get...
Well, I think the federal level, Congress has done what it needed to do by passing ACA. I think this state, and I think there may be 11 others, need to take advantage of that, such that citizens can be provided access to affordable health care.
So one of the top issues that will, and you touched on this a bit earlier, but one of the top issues that will decide people's vote here in the Duke community is, or really in any college community, is abortion. Especially given that a few months ago Roe v. Wade was overturned. So what is your stance on abortion, and what will you do in Congress to get things done on this issue?
So I think initially we need to codify Roe v. Wade. I think that if there is one thing that any human being is in control of, is his or her own body. That shouldn't be different for women as it is for men. Women should have the right to determine if they want to bear children and if they don't. Women should have the right to reproductive health care. They should be able to make those decisions with their families and their physicians. They don't need the government to say you can or cannot do it this way. I think that for 50 years, that has been the case. And then in one fell swoop, it was no more. So yes, I would vote as soon as possible to codify a woman's right to choose.
So would codifying Roe v. Wade, what would that look like? So would that bring us back to the status quo we had, for 50 years, or do you think it could go further in terms of legalizing abortion, in later stages of pregnancy, in which Roe v. Wade kind of allowed states to, set a cutoff point?
I would see codifying Roe v. Wade as it was.
Okay.
And certainly there are things that maybe could be considered later, but for women to not have access to reproductive health care in every state in this nation is unfair.
So there's a lot of concerns about, if Roe v. Wade is codified. I mean, Justice Alito and his colleagues have made it pretty clear they want abortion decided on the state level. So there could be a chance that, the Supreme Court strikes down a federal Roe v. Wade codification. What would you support in response? Do you think we should, say, pack the court, term limits? How should we reform the Supreme Court, if we should do anything?
I think we're probably at a point where we should consider term limits on the court. I don't say that in isolation of not considering other ways of ensuring that the court is fair. But I do think that an appointment to a position such as a Supreme Court justice that is a lifetime situation is probably something that we should reconsider.
Okay. So I want to move into another issue that's pretty important here in Durham and Duke in general. So as of August 2022, housing prices in Durham, they've gone up around 13.6%, and obviously this is in the context that's been going up for a while in the last few years. So it's making affordable housing really hard to find, not just for Duke students, just for anyone
Mm-hmm.
living in Durham, really. So what do you think Congress should do to address housing affordability?
I think that Congress has a role to play by ensuring that there is funding to provide mixed housing prices. I think that the number of homeless people that we see on the streets, not just in Durham and not just in the 4th District, suggests that we have a housing crisis. And people who were once able to afford housing, that is not the case as it once was. I think that access to affordable housing is something that needs to be addressed. I think that Congress does have a role to play, and it can do it by ensuring that we don't have practices like redlining, ensuring that there is funding that helps with public-private options for providing housing for people who are working in jobs that don't pay the kinds of wages that will allow them to purchase a home for $450,000. That is something that we should work on, and I think that what we're seeing with Congress now is that those efforts are being made. I think that we'll see, particularly right here in Durham, see federal money coming into this area to help provide for housing assistance, particularly as it relates to workforce housing.
So what do you think is the cause of housing affordability and getting worse and worse?
So if I had the answer to that question, I'd probably be doing something else. But I do think that what we have available in this area makes it attractive. And it becomes a situation of supply and demand. You have a number of people who want to live in this area because of all that's available, particularly as it relates to education and healthcare and science and technology. And so that, of course, that drives up the cost. But what we also see is that there are situations where there are low wages being paid. And so those folks can't keep up with people who have the ability to fight for housing on the market because they have the economic means to do so.
Yeah, speaking of wages, do you support a $15 minimum wage, or do you have
I think the $15 minimum should be the floor. I think there are a number of people who don't realize what the federal minimum is. It's $7.25.
Do you think that should be adjusted with inflation to keep
I
up?
do.
Okay. So I guess we can move on to another issue that's kind of core to Durham. So gun violence has also been on the rise in Durham in the past few years, and it's also been a prominent issue throughout the country. Over the last year, it's been on headlines, especially with the Uvalde school shooting and other incidents of gun violence. So do you support or oppose, say, like permitless carry, restrictions on the sale of semi-automatic weapons, or expanded background checks for private sellers? What is your
All of
vision
the
on that?
above. I think that common sense gun laws are they are necessary. They should be mandated right now. Why would we not want to do background checks to ensure that people who are purchasing weapons have not had incidents of where they have committed violent acts? Why would we not see a need to ban assault weapons for private use? Why would we not think that red flag laws are unfair when we know that it could mean de-escalating a situation that has occurred in a home or in a community where a person may need they need health care, they have mental health issues. All of those things make sense, that we keep guns out of the hands of people who should not be carrying guns.
So what do you say to the good chunk of the country, or maybe even half the country, that says that these restrictions are a violation of the Second Amendment? Do you think they're compatible with it, or?
We are gun owners, but we've gone through the process to have a permit to have those weapons for protection. I am not looking to take away anybody's Second Amendment rights. But I do believe that common sense should dictate what gun laws are.
Okay, cool. So another controversy that's kind of been hitting really across the country and sort of in North Carolina as well is, voter fraud or alleged voter fraud. So what do you think about allegations of widespread voter fraud that, like the kind that former President Donald Trump has alleged in 2020? And
Well,
what
they
should be
have
done
been
about
proven to be false.
it?
And what the experts say is that the 2020 election was probably the safest and the most secure election that we've had in a long time. And so those incidents of fraud that we've heard about have not been proven on a large scale. I think that we do what we can to strengthen voter protection. I think we do what we can to make sure that every vote counts, but I don't think that the big lie has been proven.
So a good portion of the country believes the big lie has happened, and they're kind of buying into Donald Trump's allegations of voter fraud. How do we assure to them that elections are fair and that we can move forward with this?
I don't know that we can. I think what we have to do is to make sure that they are fair. People are going to believe what they want to believe. And when people feel that something has been taken away from them, then they're going to protest. We all have that right.
Yeah.
But I think that we should stick to the facts, and we should trust those whom we have entrusted to make sure that what happens is fair, what happens is secure, what happens is safe. Then we have to move on. I don't know how you change the minds of people who don't want their minds changed.
So this kind of leads to a bigger issue in the country, which is the rising of the polarizing of the country, really, in that it feels like Republicans are getting more and more isolated, Democrats are more and more isolated. It's like the country is being divided in half. How do you think we should reconcile that? How can we bring the country together and not have every election be a giant fight in which people allege voter fraud and so forth?
That's a good question. The only way I can answer that is that I believe, and I believe many Americans believe, that we have more in common than we have that separates us. It is sad to me that this country has come through the civil rights era. We've come through Jim Crow, and we got to a point where we've seen greater representation of minorities at every level of government. We see outwardly an America that fits the dream that Martin Luther King Jr. had. But then all of a sudden, it just seems like with the election of a black president, things changed. All of a sudden, this notion of us being Americans, being one America, has started to dissipate, and people have gone to their corners or gone to extremes to say, I will not talk with these people, or I will not talk to those people. The beloved community that many of us look forward to one day is becoming harder and harder to accomplish. And I think that the only way that we can move towards mending those rifts is to understand that what is good for the least of these will also work for those who have plenty.
Okay. Well, I kind of want to move into foreign policy now. So a lot of people here at Duke over the past year have been pretty vocal about their stance on the Israel-Palestine conflict. So what is your stance on the Israel-Palestine conflict?
My stance is that we should be working towards a two-state solution.
Do you think that Are you satisfied with the status quo right now in that?
I'm not.
What do you think should change?
Because I don't think what we have now is a two-state solution. I think that we should ensure that human rights are protected. I believe in a Palestinian state. I believe in an Israeli state. I believe that there is a way that, and we should be working towards coexistence.
Mm-hmm. How do you address concerns of, the Jewish people in Israel? They want Jerusalem to themselves because of their religious views, and same with the Palestinians. They want Jerusalem to themselves. How do you make that coexistence possible?
I think that is something we should all be working towards as members of Congress who have supported Israel. Israel is a partner in the Middle East region with America. Mm-hmm. And I do believe that we can work towards a two-state solution. I'm not a member of Congress yet. I have been a state senator who has not had to be involved in foreign policy. So I am developing my knowledge of and what I believe will be helpful in those conversations should I be elected to Congress.
Well, I want to touch on a controversy that your campaign kind of aroused a few months ago. So according to FEC records, during your primary campaign, 54% of your campaign's total fundraising came from the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, which is a rather controversial pro-Israel super PAC. Advocacy groups, they've called on candidates to reject support from pro-Israel lobbying groups, including AIPAC. So do you have any plans to change your relationship with them? Will you accept any funding from them in the future?
So let's be clear. I don't know that you would say I have a relationship. There were two outside organizations that supported my campaign. First of all, my campaign did not take funding from AIPAC. There were AIPAC members who donated to my campaign. That situation was not something I could control. People who supported me. There were members, as I learned, who were supporters, rather, that I learned, who were members of AIPAC, who have supported me since I was a school board candidate. Should I not have taken money from those same individuals who supported me as a school board candidate or a county commissioner or a state senator? Because I was not aware that they were supporters of this one issue organization. I did not, because I could not. I have not coordinated with either of those organizations, but they did support my campaign. I think that Citizens United was decided wrong. I think we should work to remove that kind of money out of our campaign system. I think that what is not brought forward is that my campaign received more funding from inside of this state and my district than any other candidate. That has not been elevated. What has been elevated is what we saw from those two organizations. I would hope, and I do believe, that my 25 years of service to this community has value. I would hope, and I do believe, that I was the most qualified, the most experienced, and the person in that list of candidates who has given more to this district than any other. Okay. It was my desire to continue that service, and others had that same desire.
Yeah, thank you for touching on that a bit.
Sure.
So I kind of want to move into the last question, which is about healthcare. So, health costs, they're astronomically high in America compared to the rest of the world. What do you think Congress should do to address healthcare costs? How should Congress bring those costs down, if they should even do that?
I think that Congress should work to bring the costs down. I think that there is a start with the Inflation Reduction Act that will work to bring down costs, particularly allowing Medicare to work with pharmaceuticals to bring down the cost of medication. I think that the fact that when it is fully implemented, then healthcare costs for seniors will be capped at $2,000 per year. I think that there are other ways that we can work to ensure that people have access to affordable health care. We know what the Affordable Care Act has done. I think we can build on that. There are some things that we probably should fix, but it did start a blueprint for how we could bring down the cost of health care. So I would be interested in furthering that along with other ideas that might come about.
Yeah, so on your website, you indicated that you support Medicare for all. I asked you about this earlier, but
Sure.
what does that look like? Does that mean a public option? Does that mean phasing out private insurance? What is your vision for
I think it's a
public health?
combination. I think that we should start with a public option, but I don't think we should deny people the ability to have private insurance.
Okay, well, that's all the questions I have.
Sure.
I know you have to get to an event, so thank you so much again for
Thank you.
coming in. Well, thank you, Senator Foushee, for sitting down with us. Again, she's the Democratic nominee for Congress in North Carolina's 4th District, and she'll be on the ballot this November.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure.
Thank you.